Welcome, everybody, to our very exciting first pilot session of the Basics of Corporate Research. My name is Gabe Tobias. I'm a volunteer with the EWOC training team. We're very, very lucky to have two wonderful trainers with us, Lillian Osborne and Ramsin Cannon, longtime corporate researchers, both lots of experience digging into all sorts of different employers. And we've got Walker Smith with us, who's going to have sharing personal experience with the organizing work that he did and how research fit into that. And with that, I will hand it over to Lillian and Ramsin.
Hey, everybody. I guess I'll introduce myself first, and then Ramsin, you can go. So I'm based in Chicago. I work for SEIU, but not going to be representing them here. I'm also just a DSA member in Chicago. And I really got started on corporate research or campaign research as an undergrad student. I was a labor activist, and I got involved in campus dining hall workers contract campaign. And on that campaign, union research really played an integral role in tying together various struggles on campus and understanding what pressure would work on the contractor and our university and why. And ultimately that showed that, research can be really powerful. And it's why I've worked as a union researcher ever since, although I had some interludes as an organizer and low-wage worker. So I'm really excited to be here and share what I've learned.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Lillian. My name's Ramsin Cannon. I am also based in Chicago, born and raised. I am currently a labor and employment law attorney, obviously union side and worker side. Before that, for many years, I was also a union organizer, also a labor activist. I organized a couple of my own workplaces I worked in. So I went to law school a little later in life. I was 30 when I went to law school. So was able to get plenty of real world experience before that, and have been working representing and consulting for union locals, internationals, regional councils, and all types of different bodies on organizing drives, on strategic campaigns, and rank and file activism and all that good stuff. Like Lillian, I am a DSA member and have been very active in my DSA chapter at least since 2016.
Thanks, Ramsin. And in a little bit, we're going to hear from Walker, who works for a private ambulance company and helped his coworkers organize a union. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about how they used research in that effort. So with that, we can get started.
There's a lot of reasons research is important, and there's a lot of different ways research can be used. I think for the purposes of this training and sort of in our experience and what we hope you all take from this and what you all can help you all do and workers do in general is basically along these three paths here. Research helps us leverage our collective power, which, as it says there, it basically means something very specific, which is that by understanding where we can act, that helps us focus our energies in organizing drives. It helps us to see where, obviously we understand that workers have all the power in the workplace when they act collectively and in solidarity, but research helps us to focus where and when we use that power. On an internal level, it helps us identify the paths for organizing, which basically means it helps us in the early stages of organizing our workplaces. It helps us understand how we need to organize, meaning who we need to be talking to, what the company looks like or the employer looks like. Helps us to understand the way labor law interacts with our specific workplace. Whether that's federal labor law or state labor law or the way other laws interact with it, for example, in the healthcare industry and in other places. So it helps us understand our own sort of day-to-day tasks in organizing our workplaces. And lastly, and this kind of covers everything, it informs our decision making, because there's always going to be a limited amount of time, a limited amount of energy, a limited amount of capacity in an organizing drive. And taking the time to understand the terrain helps you plan much better. It helps you focus, and it helps you make sure that people. And this is, I mean, in my experience, particularly important. It helps people make decisions. It helps us make decisions that make sure that people don't get burned out or frustrated. I'm sure we've all had the experience that in organizing, people are really sensitive to the sort of effort reward dynamic. People want to see that the work they're putting in is having some kind of result. That doesn't mean that everything they do results in a win, but it means that people want to understand that what they're doing is for a purpose and is having some kind of intended result. And research helps to make sure that we're able to connect people's effort to sort of the outcome. A lot of times, along that first line, a lot of times, in order to win these organizing campaigns, it's not enough just to, just to organize on the shop floor. Sometimes you need to reach outside of the shop floor to bring pressure to bear on the company in other ways, or the employer in other ways. And so what we're going to talk about here in terms of corporate research is particularly geared towards that dimension of organizing. So purpose of this training today is to help us all think like researchers, how and where to dig up what you need on your boss, learning what information actually matters and how to use that information in a campaign.
So, research is for everybody except the boss, although I'm sure they're using their own kind of research. Really, this is why I love doing research, especially in the union, as opposed to a Washington, D.C. think tank or a fancy nonprofit or consulting firm. Union researchers, whether you are in a staff position or not, are average people who are committed to building the labor movement and apply themselves to learning new things every day for that cause. And so I've really learned like the best researchers are average people because, they're people who have lived full lives, worked lots of jobs, have lots of life experience, because those are the people who really know how the working world works. So really all you have to be able to do in order to be a corporate researcher or campaign researcher is learn about and understand how the world really works. What are the real facts of things, to be able to explain what you've learned to your coworkers or to workplace activists you're organizing with, and be able to make the case for why one course of action is more powerful or better than another. Because like Ramsin said, we oftentimes have limited resources like money, time, and support. So, and then I'll just say, I think, I said I'm a member of DSA, I'm a socialist, and the kind of materialist thinking and organizing and writing and public speaking that I've learned to do through DSA has been extremely helpful for this kind of work. So for those of you who are already, socialists or DSA members, you probably have a head start on this. And if you're not already, we'll have some contact information at the end and you can reach out to learn more about that. So Ramsin, do you want to share some examples of kind of what sort of research we're talking about?
Yeah, this is really important because I think this training is a technical training, but I mean, a big part of the technical aspect of this training is sort of helping us all to think specifically about what research is. And research is, it's not a separate department. Sometimes unions put it in a separate department, but I think, as Lillian will tell you, even when they do that, there's going to be a lot of overlap with organizing. And research is on a continuum with the organizing project, and it's really helpful. It's been very helpful for me to think about it this way. And sometimes it can even be surprising when, I've been working with workers who are in an organizing drive or in a contract campaign or something, to kind of always be turning things back to workers on the shop floor and saying that, the research starts there. The research starts on the shop floor with what workers know, what workers are communicating with each other, and it's on a continuum. So, to that extent, there's always going to be a few different angles or areas of research that are important. There's going to be, as we discussed, ways to bring pressure on the employer. There's going to be a need to understand the employer so that you can do your best job organizing inside of it. There's going to be a need to understand sort of the greater policy world or legal world outside the shop floor and outside the sort of an industry that you're working in to understand how it applies. So we have 3 examples here. There's a big nonprofit healthcare entity, healthcare company in Chicago, Howard Brown Health. Howard Brown Health is a major provider of healthcare that specifically is oriented towards LGBTQI working class people here in the city. And as a result of that, it is very sensitive to its public image. Now, workers at Howard Brown Health began organizing, and we'll go into more detail about this example. But it's an important one because it's an important example because it is one of where the folks who are doing the work, only through kind of communicating with each other, understanding how the business operated, where its revenue came from, and importantly, what its leadership was sensitive to, could the employees really start to bring a lot of pressure down on the entire healthcare entity to assist in their organizing. Related, and so that's kind of a big picture thing. Related to that, corporate structure is, especially in the healthcare industry, but in a lot of industries, these employers can be very complex. So if you're helping folks who are organizing somewhere, whether that's at a hospital, a health clinic, whatever type of place it is, it's important to be able to have conversations with the workers and the workers have conversations with each other to understand the structure of the place they're organizing, because that will inform them and inform us who are helping of, like, for example, what the appropriate collective bargaining unit might be. Are you going to be in the union with these folks who you work with more often or less often? Is it going to make more sense to organize with this department over here or that department over here? Do you need all the departments together? Should we focus on one? Are the delivery people going to be able to organize with the shop floor people, etc.? Those things, you can have people who have organized a million places and have a lot of expertise in sort of the legal aspects of it, but unless there have been a lot of good detailed conversation with workers about their day-to-day work, it's going to be very hard to actually design an organizing campaign. And so understanding the structure of a company is key, but you'll never figure that out just by looking on paper. You can only learn that through having a lot of conversations with people who are doing the work every day. So that's why we say research always starts on the shop floor and it's a continuum up and out from there. And this last example here we have on wage theft laws. We'll get into that example a little more later as well. But wage theft laws is one example of something that there is a lot of brazen wage theft out in the world, but a lot of wage theft is very subtle. And in my experience, having litigated a bunch of wage theft cases, people only realize they're being stolen from when they've had enough conversations with their coworkers, especially their coworkers maybe who are in a different location or in a different department. And people slowly start to realize, like, oh, this wasn't just a mistake that happened to me a few times. This is something that the company does. This is a policy they have that is maybe only stealing a little bit from me, but from all of us together, it's quite a bit of money. And of course, that can always be leveraged into putting more and more pressure on an employer. As Lillian mentioned, later on, we'll be hearing from Walker, who's going to give us some great examples of sum of all of these.
So yeah, so I think, really just to kind of sum up what we're trying to accomplish with this training is we want to give you a basic introduction to what corporate research is and how, it can strengthen workplace campaigns, give you some basic tools and concepts to think about, and then kind of help you think like a researcher, or at least start thinking like a researcher. So, you don't necessarily have to use or should use all of the things that we're providing you with. What research is going to be helpful to you really depends on what stage of organizing you're at and what's useful for your campaign on the ground, depending on the kind of company you work at, the stage of your campaign, what your coworkers care about, and other things. So like Ramsin said, really the best place to start is with what you already know, starting kind of on the shop floor. And that's not just because it's the most kind of practical approach, though it probably is for our purposes. But really it's because what you know, or what the activists who work at a company that you're organizing with know, is probably really vital information for the company. So we're going to try and kind of provide some examples as we go of ways, you probably already have some insights into some of the really important elements of corporate research. So, just kind of some key questions to sort of start asking yourself. A lot of what we do as researchers is learn to think like the boss. And you probably already have some insights into this. So a lot of what employers think about is how the company is doing financially and where it's going next. So, I'm just going to put out there that there could be an entire training series or master's program, and there are, about how to evaluate something like the financial status and outlook of a company. But for our purposes, I kind of just summed this up into sort of two areas of financials. The first is, how does the employer make money or stay afloat? And, that could be like, what are the products and services that they sell or provide? Which ones are key to keeping the company going to profit? Do they care about a particular brand image that they're kind of using in order to do business? I think there are some different types of ways you can find that kind of information out. We're going to provide a handout for you all to kind of use as sort of a starting point for the resources that are out there. But one of them is, some companies have to release public financial statements, and you could find this information there. But if you don't have that, you might also be able to tell how your employer makes, the bread and butter by, what you've learned working at the company. So, a couple questions to kind of ask yourself is what is the work you spend the most time on? What work do you have to document or do paperwork about the most? What seems to get the most attention by management? Those are some starting points for thinking about really what is the most important part or element of the company to the employer. And then another kind of key aspect of the financials of a company are what the employer wants to make, how the employer wants to make money in the future. So what bosses really care about and spend a huge portion of their time thinking about isn't just understanding kind of the money they currently earn day to day. It's about also figuring out how to make more money, right? So, where does the employer want to grow or expand? What's their strategy? And oftentimes this is an area of the company that isn't really the bread and butter, or the bulk of the work. It might be actually a smaller part of the company's profits or not even profitable yet at all. So this is a little bit harder to tell, in terms of research, but if your company doesn't have to make public financial disclosures or you don't have access to them, some places you can look are kind of news reports about your company or the industry that you're in, the boss's social media, what are they interested in or following? And also one of the reasons that folks who have worked at companies for a long time are so important is because, they often have a kind of read on what the work has been like over the duration, and, whether there might be new areas of work that they've been doing that could give you a sense of kind of, oh, this is somewhere where we're trying to kind of make a foray into. And then, another aspect of just thinking like the boss, what matters to the boss is like, who are the key decision makers for the company? So when we're thinking about who's in charge, really, I think it's kind of helpful to think like, who's the person who could make a phone call even and deliver on your demands? Or maybe there's a broader, shareholders was a good example I wasn't even thinking of, owners, boards of directors, if your company has one. So those are a few different kinds of places, and I'll sort of show you that it's not too difficult actually to figure out who these people are. And then, another area that's important to employers is sort of their important business relationships, right? So that might be key contracts or suppliers, board members, relationships with other companies or boards, even lenders. So again, there's a lot here that we're summing up in just one slide, but I think the idea is to kind of give you some insight into what are the things your company or the folks that you're organizing with their company is really thinking about. So the next kind of area that I think is important is stakeholders, right? And again, this is probably similar to some of the things you've already learned through organizing. I think a broad definition would be like, stakeholders are people or groups that care about the issues you or workplace activists are dealing with, right? And so kind of for our purposes, I'm using a really kind of broad net that this could be regulatory agencies or bodies, it could be moral or religious groups, it could also be political actors like in the government, a group of people who will be affected by decisions that the company makes, right? So, these are kind of the people who could play a role in sort of holding the company accountable, right? So, some places to start when you're thinking about like, okay, who really matters is, were there any past times where the company got into trouble for bad behavior, like legal or compliance issues, right? Sometimes folks who are working at a company know about that. And, another kind of possibility is like, do they require a certification to operate? In Walker's case, you have to have a license to be a paramedic. What happens if the company messes up in that realm, and can't necessarily operate with the folks that are working there? Do they have business locations like in a political jurisdiction with a representative who might care, right? Like in Chicago, we have aldermen who are really active, or congressmen who are progressive leaders who might show up and show support or write a letter, right? So another option is like, does the company have a religious affiliation? I mentioned that I went to school and was involved in a workplace campaign there. And one of the key things is that this was a Jesuit school with kind of a social justice brand image and an affiliation with the Catholic Church. And so we really used that and brought, members of sort of the clergy out to protests to kind of put pressure on the university. So this can be really a broad, a broad look into who potential stakeholders are. But, I think there's one other important element in this kind of area is that, like, you all also have stakeholders. Like, if you're a worker at a workplace, like, you and your coworkers likely have people who really care about what goes on with you in your workplace and would be interested to hear what the issues are. And so I think this kind of goes back to sort of community organizing terrain of, like, research isn't always just about the company. It's also about you and your coworkers and identifying the ways that you actually have power. So if you're part of a religious organization or a member of a community group, maybe like DSA, a neighborhood sports club, even, really any place where you have close relationships with other people in a group can be powerful. And so, I think when we're thinking about research, this presentation focuses on a lot on what is the company doing and care about, but I think it's also about identifying what you and your coworkers care about and the kinds of connections you have that make you powerful. Yeah, I love that, Courtney. In my community, we prefer to use the word partners over stakeholders. We lean into community building, right? Yeah, these are people we're identifying who can partner with us in our struggle. So, like I said, we're going to provide a handout that kind of goes over some of the really useful resources that might be helpful in doing some campaign research for you all. But I just wanted to go through a couple options or a couple things that are out there that people don't always think about in terms of research. So, the first is like public or government databases and sources. And sometimes this depends on the sector, but even like the public library, actually, if you live in a city with a public library, you probably do. They oftentimes have databases that can be really helpful in doing research. There's also sector-specific regulatory bodies like CMS or the FAA and other places that have large data sets that might help you kind of put together some talking points or think about, some of these other questions that we raised. And then there's also like workplace regulatory body databases like OSHA, the EEOC, the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division, that might be able to help you kind of dig up some dirt on your employer and potential past violations that could help. And then also, if it has anything to do, if your question or your interest has anything to do with a government body, you probably have the ability to FOIA, use the Freedom of Information Act request to get access to public information. So, that's one area. Social media platforms are really powerful, and it's a really important reminder to be thoughtful when you're putting out information about yourself, because probably your boss is putting out a lot of information about themselves without realizing it. And so, LinkedIn, I don't know if anybody here belongs to the Reddit subgroup LinkedIn Lunatics, but your boss might be on there. Other workers might have posted things on Glassdoor, which is a place where people can kind of review the quality of a company in terms of being an employer. There's Yelp, Twitter, Facebook. Like, these are all really powerful, actually, sources of information. So, that's a great place to start. And then I also just think, like, part of your role as a researcher or like putting on your research thinking cap is tracking information as it develops. So, I use Google News alerts to see, like, if there's ever any news about a company that I'm following. I also, ask to be on a notification list for city government bodies if they're discussing things that matter to the campaign. You can also go to industry publications, depending on what industry you're in, to kind of learn more about what people in the industry are talking about and thinking about. And then the last thing is just like, sometimes you have to create your own information sources in order to kind of validate what your concerns are or the issues that you have. And so, I spend a lot of my time doing surveys and circulating surveys, and kind of crowdsourcing information that way. And I also, we all are kind of in this together. And I just want to say, like, if you run into a spot where you're not sure what to do or what to look into, this is not like a solo endeavor. Like, reach out to people that to think through, what information would be helpful or that you could explore. So, if you're in an organization like EWOC or DSA or a union, you can always ask for help if you need ideas. Okay, and then I just wanted to show you, Google search is your friend, sort of. You can get a lot of information actually by just doing a Google search. So I use DuckDuckGo now because it has better privacy and slightly better algorithms. You don't have to do that, but let's look up Howard Brown Health Center. Okay, so really, it's important to remember that, like, you can find a lot of useful information. You just kind of it's out there. The truth is out there. You just kind of have to know what information actually matters. So just kind of looking at this, like, all right, we're seeing, some opportunities maybe to organize. Like, have we talked to everybody in these locations? That could be helpful. I'm going to skip this for a second and come down here. You have the website. I'm going to come back to that. You also are kind of getting a sense of, like, what do they care about? Oh, here's a GuideStar profile, which is actually, this is really useful if you work for a nonprofit because it'll tell you some of the funding sources. I'm not going to click on it because, you can always look into it yourself, but there's one option. Oh, and here's some news about a larger health clinic. That's pretty important. They're doubling capacity for their size. That actually would be really important information to have if you're a researcher, because that might be an opportunity for some leverage, right? And I'm just going to even go back and show you, what you can find even just on the company website. Okay, so you got a list of services, so you can kind of see, okay, they've got a lot going on here: health services, sexual reproductive counseling, right? Providers. Let's see, board of directors. Wouldn't you know it? We've got some friendly looking people here, right? Members at large. You could even go start looking into some of these folks. You've got some news. All right, let's see what they're saying about themselves. Oh, okay. So you can kind of, if you're looking through here, like, think about, all right, what's the image that they are projecting? What, is happening in their, what kind of image are they cultivating, even just on their website, right? What's important here is, like, a lot of times companies are just, like, putting out there for anyone to grab, like, what really matters to them and what they care about. So, I think Google can be a really important place to start a search.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big picture here in terms of the training, the skills of research, is that it's not really about, it's not as much about the tools and the databases you have access to and knowing, like, where certain information is held. That you will learn. What's important is knowing what you know, knowing what you need to find out, and programmatically getting information from the people who do the work every day. I think that is critical. Because otherwise you could end up spinning your wheels a lot on sort of guessing at what might be important to the company or what might be its internal structure. And I'm going to share a couple of examples, but I want to start with first planning your organizing. This is a little harder to just sort of like give a template for because it can be so different from workplace to workplace. But to understand why this is important, and Walker is going to give us a good sort of like object lesson when he goes through his personal experience of organizing ambulance services. But planning your organizing, it's basically power mapping to some degree, right? We all learn that. We all learn how important it is to map the workplace. Who are people that have worked there a long time? Who are people who are influential on the shop floor? Who are who knows who works with who touches each department and all that stuff. But beyond that, it's also important in understanding priorities and limitations. And here's where I am going to give you an example. I have in the past, working with a healthcare union, a nurses union, come across this quite a bit. So a lot of healthcare is nonprofitized, right? We know that it's run by nonprofits, even though they, in essence, still act like for-profits. But the thing about nonprofits is that they acquire each other all the time. In fact, they absorb each other. The way they absorb each other, they can't buy one another because they're nonprofits. So interestingly, the way they do it is they usually do it by absorbing one another's debt. So one nonprofit will go to another nonprofit, and they want to. One healthcare nonprofit wants to take over another one's hospital or cancer clinic or OBGYN practice or whatever, and they will essentially say, "We will take on your debt, and in exchange, you will sort of become part of our corporate web." That has caused, as you can imagine, in the context of union organizing, a lot of challenges for workers that work for those entities. A major one right now that has a number of strikes going against it is one that's called Ascension Healthcare. Ascension Healthcare is huge. It's a multi-state entity. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of what they call sites of care, which just means like clinics and hospitals and doctors' offices and stuff. I believe over 100,000 employees at this point, but a significant number of employees. Just in Chicago, just in the Chicago region, Ascension Healthcare, in the years that I've been dealing with it and helping organize workers at it, my mom actually used to work for them. They have been called variously Resurrection Healthcare, Presence Health, Presence Medical Group, Amita Healthcare. There was another one in between there that they were called. Then they became called Ascension. In a single hospital, sometimes they will have, on paper, 5, 6, or 7 different employers. The cancer clinic will be Presence Medical Group or something. The the emergency room will be Ascension. The the headache clinic, which is a big profit center for them, will be Resurrection. And then sometimes they lease space, supposedly, in the hospital to a for-profit doctors group that specializes in orthopedics or something. So as a result, even though we all know it's just one workplace, the nurses work in all these departments, they float between them, the environmental services workers clean the entire place, they will kind of have this fiction that, well, actually, this is just a shell of a building that has 9 different employers inside of it. And they will potentially rely on that to prevent the workers from all organizing together or to keep this department from organizing with this department. And something like that is very important to know and is very difficult to find out if the workers aren't talking to each other about it. And the most straightforward way is by showing each other their paychecks, right? Because one person's paycheck will say, it'll have their title, it'll have the date or whatever, and then at the top it'll say that who paid them. And in one case, it's Resurrection Healthcare, and in another case, it's Amita Health or whatever the other fake company is that got absorbed at some point 20 years ago or something. Something as simple as that is not going to come easily through Googling or searching the Department of Public Health's records or something. You might be able to find some complex bureaucratic document that you might need to interpret at some point that says, the certificate of need for this hospital was transferred from this corporate entity to this corporate entity, and that's important information to have. But when it comes to the shop floor and the organizing that you're planning, right? When the nurses or the counselors or the nurses assistants in one part of the hospital start organizing, the key thing you're trying to understand is, first of all, do they technically have the same employer as the people they work alongside? If not, why not? When did the one absorb the other? How much interaction do they have? That kind of thing can be very critical to helping plan just your shop floor organizing. Now, I want to take a step towards, and just to sum that up before we move on to sort of like a bigger, more complex thing, that will only happen if you are encouraging the workers to talk to each other about this stuff. And if you just are sitting down with as many as you can and just asking as many questions about their day-to-day work as possible. Because you have to remember, from the shop floor point of view, somebody's going into work every day, they're doing their job every day, they're focused on it. They have a huge amount of information that they might not necessarily have the full context for, but which they know very well, right? And so it takes sometimes somebody from the outside, or just somebody who's focused on doing the research, even if they are, somebody who also works there, to take the little bits of context from all over the place and then give everybody that works there a big picture. Like, do you know why your paycheck comes on Thursdays, the second Thursday, but like so-and-so who works right next to you, their paycheck comes on the third Thursday? That's because technically, she works for Resurrection and you work for Amita. Or it's because your pay comes through Medicaid and their pay comes through Medicare or something. Those little bits of information can be very important to helping you map the corporate structure and therefore help you focus your organizing plan. Like, okay, first of all, we're going to organize this entire department. That's key because we know this department will be considered one unit. We think we can get all the other departments too, but we need to go department by department. Let's make sure we have this full department, and then we'll try to connect them to the other department. And we know the case the employer is going to make. They're going to say like, oh, technically these are two different entities. But if you know that, then you can be prepared for that argument and come with evidence to show why that argument is wrong. But critically, worst case scenario, well, we've organized this department. We did the organizing here. The 30 or 40 environmental services workers that work in this department, they're ready to, if we held the election today, we'd win it. And, if we think we can, we'll do a multi-department election. If we can't, we know we can start with that one unit, right? So that all starts with knowing the questions to ask, but importantly, just asking a lot of questions. What do you do every day? What forms do you fill out? If there's an incident on the floor, do you have to fill out a form? If so, what is that form called? Who gets it? Who reviews it? Does somebody have to sign off on it? Has anyone ever gotten in trouble for not doing it? All those types of things. For somebody whose job it is, it can just seem like, yeah, that's just something they told me to do, and I've been doing it for 20 years, and I don't really care why. I just know that I have to do it, right? But it could end up being something critically important, especially if it's something that, with enough context, you can connect to a larger issue. Which brings me to sort of pressuring the company, this bigger picture thing. So I'm going to share two stories, and this came up in the while doing some organizing with grocery workers. Here you see that it was in this year in Colorado, state lawmakers, after lobbying pressure from the grocery retail industry, passed a bill that allowed grocery stores to sell full-strength beer and wine, which they weren't allowed to do before. So, we can ask ourselves why. I mean, we can guess, but I mean, there's a limited amount of time in a legislative session. They have only so much resources that they're going to spend on lobbying. Why did they make this a priority that year? This was actually in 2016. Why did they make this their priority that year? And the answer is that it's because profit margins in the grocery industry are very small. They're extremely small, 1 to 3%. But the markup on alcohol is very high. Okay. So those two facts separately are interesting. I mean, it's good to know grocery stores have small profit margins. It's part of the reasons grocers fight so hard to not be union. As you can see here, because, it says, and by the way, this is POS Nation, well, a hilarious name, sounding name to us, is Point of Sale Nation. And this is one of the trade industry publications that Lillian mentioned. It's a trade industry publication for the retail industry. Apparently they don't have anyone cool as hell in their organization to tell them that actually sounds like an insult, POS Nation. But anyway, as you can see here, it says, the grocery store profit margins sit between 1% and 2%. So big grocers obviously have a much bigger advantage in the marketplace than small grocers, because they make up for the small margins. If you're only making a 1% profit on your sales, on your total sales, you need to make a lot of sales, right? That's why Walmart goes by margin, right? By volume. They need to sell a lot to make their huge profits, because for each individual sale, the profits are very small. But the markup on alcohol is very high. So they have a very strong incentive to be able to sell full strength beer and wine at their grocery stores. Now, every entity that we're talking about, I don't care if it's Starbucks coffee, hospitals, grocery stores, they have to interact with the world in a variety of ways. In this case, you can't sell alcohol pretty much anywhere in the United States without a liquor license. And there are different classes of liquor license. There's off-site liquor licenses, which means you sell it, package goods, and people can leave with it. There's on-site consumption. There's liquor versus beer and wine. And it's different in different states, but just about in every state you need a liquor license. In California, and I believe in Colorado and in other states, you have to get a license from the state. There's a state board of alcohol and beverage control. In other states, like in Illinois, there's a local license you have to get, but that's regulated by the state separately. In any case, these grocers, anytime they're opening a new store, they need a new license. So if they're saying, oh, we're going to build a new grocery store in this gentrifying area, and they announce it, they put it on their website, coming soon, they put a sign on the lot that they're going to build on. One of the things that that we know, and that we knew when they were started to announce all these new stores, was that they're going to have to get liquor licenses for all these stores. And the people who live around places don't always want places to have liquor licenses, because liquor licenses often lead to increases in crime, traffic incidents, and it can have an adverse effect on property values. In any case, it's something that they need to get from the state that people can organize to stop them from getting. And if we know they're dependent on those liquor licenses for their profits, then we know that's an area of sensitivity they have, and that's a way we can put pressure on the company. If the workers of one store show up to the hearing for the license, and they say, we work at such and such store, and we know that they don't actually card check, ID check when they sell these, because they don't hire enough people to stand by the doors or to stand by the automated checkouts or whatever. They don't protect the packages in the back. They get stolen all the time. So that's something that could come up. You're talking to workers who are organizing. You ask them a question. What's the alcohol sales like there? And they say, oh, well, kids are walking out with them all the time. They don't leave them locked up in the back, so people are walking out with them. Well, that's something that the public might want to know. And that's something that could interfere with their ability to get a liquor license in the future. So that's one example of where we start with conversations on the shop floor. We look at the context in which these companies are, and then we look for sensitivities that we can use to place pressure on them. Another example, that's kind of a bigger example, is something that happened pretty recently. You see the date on this is August 2023. This is something that happened in New York State. And you see the caption there, Dave Carew of the Teamsters pledged the union support to the opposition to the EPCAL sale. This was an instance where there's this industrial developer that in this town of Riverhead on Long Island, which is like a nice suburban town. They wanted to take over what had been like a municipal airport it was kind of like an executive airport. It was for like small flights and stuff, small planes. It was small, situated in this suburb on Long Island. It was known as EPCAL, the Enterprise Park at Calverton. It was pretty clear that this developer wanted to turn it into what we would call a jet port or a cargo hub. The gentleman you see here, Dave Carew, is a leader, a rank and file leader of his Teamsters local, which represents a lot of UPS workers and other workers in the logistics industry. And they connected with the local community groups there that were opposed to this project. The local residents did not want this to turn into a jet port because it would mean a lot more flights, bigger planes, which means louder planes, a lot more traffic coming in and out. They're worried about it. And as you can imagine, these workers who work in the logistics industry don't want necessarily more logistics facilities to get built if they're going to be operated non-union. And in fact, if their purpose is to undermine union facilities like UPS and other union employers. And so these folks like Dave and the folks in his Teamsters local, who also obviously have members who live in this community beyond just being workers that work there, they talk to their members who lives here, who lives in that neighborhood, who lives in those communities. They connected with the community groups. As you can imagine, there are also environmental groups that were active there. And they helped organize this opposition to this project, which, if you could probably guess who was eventually going to operate this cargo hub. If you think of large non-union package delivery entities. And that is a way that this local, obviously working with other organizations and community groups, other labor groups, was able to put pressure on the industry in general, but those non-union employers in particular, to basically say, we're not going to let you go around sticking these logistics nodes in communities that don't want them just for the purpose of undermining union logistics infrastructure. And it was successful. I think it was eventually in October that it was voted down. And now, at least in the time being, that facility is not going to get built. Those are two examples of looking at how this institution that you're organizing, whether it's a private company, a nonprofit, a public sector employer like a university or whatever, you want to look at where it connects to the outside world, what licenses the companies need, what contracts it has with other companies, what other industries it relies on. Like in the case of that last example I showed you, the logistics industry relies on, these cargo hubs and stuff like that in order to get the packages in. And look for those sensitivities in order to sort of aggravate those sensitivities and place pressure on the company to express the worker power, give an object to the organizing. In the case of that EPCAL fight, obviously there was going to be a vote, right, of the village board. So it was something that was like a measurable win that they could do. They could organize the community. They could turn people out to public hearings and zoning hearings or whatever it was. Prepare talking points and do studies to see what the impact was going to be. Look at the history of this facility, blah, blah, blah. All the stuff that has to do that could result in a tangible win, which in that instance it did. And that can obviously give a lot of momentum and also creates organic connections between a union or workers who are organizing, the community around them, and other organizations, whether those are environmental groups or homeowners associations or whatever. In this case, also park districts, park boosters and stuff like that, which helps, make the workers feel less isolated. But also when push comes to shove and they're, doing that contract campaign or doing that union vote, they can feel like they have the community at their back. And they can feel like they're going to have supporters when they're on the picket line. And they can lean on that support if they need to. Because again, like none of these entities exist in a vacuum. None of these companies exist in a vacuum. They're in a network of relationships, and we want to be able to identify those relationships. Something like the EPCAL project or something like those liquor licenses that those small grocers rely on, you're not necessarily going to just intuitively know those things. You'll learn them through talking to the workers. In the case of the grocery store, it was because folks who had been there 5, 10, 15 years were able to tell us, like, oh yeah, the managers are always going on and on about the beer and wine sales and how important it is, right? They're always going on and on about it because they're getting pressure from the district manager, who's getting pressure from the CFO or whatever, who's telling them, like, get those numbers up because we really rely on those numbers. And you know, for them, it's just another pain in the ass for them, right? Like they're always busting our chops to make sure that, you know, everything's well stocked and we're getting everything out as soon as we sell something, we're replacing it, blah blah blah. But that information comes to a researcher, somebody who's trying to connect the context and look at the big picture, and they know that's a lead they need to follow up on. Well, if the company's really concerned about it, let's look at whether there's a way to put pressure on it. And the same was the case for the EPCAL thing, where the members of that local, because they live in those neighborhoods, they live in those areas, had gotten word. And if you are somebody who works in the logistics industry and you hear cargo hub, that those words hit your ears different, right? And you're going to go to your union siblings and be like, hey, I just heard they're building this thing in our neighborhood. Should we be worried about that, or should we be looking at it? You know, and then that filters through, and that's something that as a researcher you can use. And connecting to larger issues is really kind of just what I covered there, which is that, like, you know, in the case of a cargo hub or a liquor license or whatever, those are quality of life things for people who live in those neighborhoods. In the case of something like Howard Brown Health, you know, there's patient communities and who are impacted when a healthcare, you know, when a hospital is short-staffed, when there's not enough nurses, when there's not enough counselors, when there's not enough EVS workers to keep the place clean. There are bigger issues here that people are impacted by, and if you can connect a shop floor fight or a contract campaign fight to those issues, it's going to put some wind in the sails of that campaign, and make it much stronger. But it's on a continuum, right? Like, we always learn those things better by having those conversations with people on the shop floor, because they're just going to know them. You know, it might not come out just by asking the question, so what's the sensitivity of your employer? But if you learn what their day-to-day work is, if you learn what the pressures inside of the company are that they feel as workers, then that will help us sort of reverse engineer those things. This is the bummer lawyer part that lawyers like me always insist we put in there. So the trick here is, I don't want to ever scare people out of being aggressive. As you can tell, I'm all about being aggressive in these organizing drives. But I do need to scare you a little bit into not messing up in a way that gets you in trouble. So some basic things. First, people are very concerned about libel and slander. It's actually one of the questions I get most on these organizing drives. People are afraid to say anything about their supervisor or about the company because they're like, well, is that libel? Could I get sued for that? And the answer is, as long as what you're saying is based on facts, no. First of all, opinions can't be libelous. And if you're stating something as a fact that is a fact, it's, you know, truth is an absolute defense. That means do your research and make sure anything you're going public with you can support factually. To do that, however, never take company property or use company resources for research. That's because it could be confidential information. And while that might not get you like in criminal trouble, it could get somebody fired. It could get an organizing campaign sued if they induced somebody to leave with confidential information. So just be careful about that stuff. You know, just don't take company property without permission. And just, you know, have that conversation with everybody. Usually people intuitively understand that, but it's good to reiterate it, because sometimes people can get a little, you know, excited. And I say this as somebody who back in the day, as an organizer, like, we used to dumpster dive for payroll lists, which is illegal. Don't do that, but we used to do it. But now that I'm a lawyer, I have to tell you not to do it. The other thing too, though, I'll say is get a second opinion, because the United States is a very litigious country. We watch a lot of law shows, so people have a lot of folk understanding of the law. They're like, oh, actually, you can't do that because you'll get sued, or you can't do this; it's illegal. Um, Anytime you feel somebody's trying to spook you out of doing something or scare you out of like taking some approach, uh, it could be for a good reason, but it could also be not correct. So if you can get a second legal opinion from somebody, get a second legal opinion. In general, try to do that. Don't just go hunting for somebody who's going to tell you that you can do whatever you want. But if you do have access to somebody, um, uh, do try to get a second opinion and ask some clarifying questions, like what trouble could we get into? Why can't I do it? Like what law prevents me from doing X? I saw somebody ask, is dumpster diving like sort of generally off limits? Depends on the dumpster. If somebody throws something in a trash can that's on a sidewalk, you could probably reach into that trash can if you were so inclined. But if it's a dumpster on private property, don't go in that. That's trespassing. That's technically still their property until it gets taken away to the big dump. And then when it's in the big dump, unless it's a municipal dump, it's also still on private property. So generally speaking, you shouldn't do that. And you could get in some kind of trouble for doing it. But thankfully, as we saw here, there are plenty of ways to do the research, and I'm sure we'll get some more questions like that. So if people have more, they can throw it in there. But that's my legal PSA for this session. And now we're going to hand it over to Walker, who's going to give us a great case study of some of the great organizing work they did here in Chicago.
Hi everyone. I'm going to give you the case study for what we can now report was a successful union drive at a private ambulance company here in Chicago. And more or less, it's going to touch on basically everything that Ramsin and Lillian have covered tonight. I started working at a company called Elite Ambulance, and I wanted to organize there basically immediately, and didn't think that it was possible. It's a very large company. It's not the largest in our area, but it's one of, with thousands of workers across multiple locations in 3 different states. So it didn't seem like something that I could personally handle, even if it was me and then a group of friends. It was probably outside of our scope. And the campaign got made possible basically by a research task. I was doing my internship with the fire department as part of paramedic school, and happened to be placed with somebody who had been staff on a campaign to organize one of the garages of Elite Ambulance. He had been past staff for the IAEP, which is part of SEIU. And he told me that they had an election at a garage in the southern suburbs, which perked my ears up because it meant that at some time in the past, an election had been run at a single garage of Elite. So we're getting what Ramsin already told you, the information about how the company is structured and how that can actually structure our organizing campaign. So I went and found the old case from back in 2014, where somebody had run an election and won. The IAP had actually won on the first round at the garage in the southern suburbs, and then the company was actually able to get it rerun because somebody used a company computer to send out an email to everybody in the bargaining unit, and it had a manager's email signature at the bottom, which should underline some of the stuff that Ramsin told you about not using company resources for this kind of thing. They got the election reran, and it tied. The second election tied, which means that the election goes to the company. So we now have this company history. We have some understanding that we actually only have to target one garage, which puts a campaign within the capacity of a small group of organizers. And through my class, I knew several people that were all concentrated in the Chicago garage of Elite within a single place. So we had this group of organizers that could now coordinate and a manageable target. Over the next period of time, the next several months, we were able to get people together and start researching things about this company and actually several companies throughout the region, collecting information on other ambulance companies. And that was the actual organizing committee. It was me, who was outside of the bargaining committee, the unit that we were actually trying to organize, and other friends from DSA, including our friend JP, who's here tonight. Thank you so much. Part of this was like just getting group chats together. We had like at least one study party to get together and talk about what we needed to know about these ambulance companies. Not all of it was immediately useful. Some of it was just stuff that we now know that might be useful possibly down the road for getting to a first contract. And some of it it was just interesting to us and may not eventually be useful. But we were able to get, for instance, one of the things that I looked into was was PPP loans that might have been provided by the government to these companies to keep operating during COVID, which was all publicly available information, searchable on the ProPublica website. And many of your employers might have also done this as well. And that gave us information about how much money companies were given by the government as part of this program and what they told the government they were going to use it for as well. The most important things, though, that we collected were largely just the stuff that we've talked about stuff that people already know because they're working there, and getting it together in a form that's usable for an organizing campaign. So when we got together, we were able to find that a lot of people that worked at different garages this company had deductions from their paychecks made to cover the cost of traffic violations that they committed while they were operating operating their work vehicles. They were getting money taken automatically out of their checks for red light cameras, for speed cameras, including some where that they had some costs that they had incurred while operating with lights and sirens on. The company was just basically not spending the time to just go and say that in a court and just deducting that money from their paychecks. And that has turned into a class action that is getting some people some money back that the company may have taken from them. And it's also making the campaign more visible to other workers. There are people that are not at the garage where the campaign originally started who reached out because there was some local media coverage. Our local PBS channel covered it, and people reached out to the campaign and reached out to worker organizers who were mentioned to say hey, they did this to me as well, which gets them the money back, and it also makes possible future worker organizers visible to the campaign. One of the other things that was that we collected over time was we looked into and we were able to get documentation of who actually makes scheduling and disciplinary decisions at the company, which was a major important piece of the campaign, because our case for why we should be able to hold the election the way that we did and organize the way that we did rested on organizing at this single garage. And the company's main defense was to try to knock down that bargaining unit, to try and expand it out, or to say that this wasn't a coherent bargaining unit, that scheduling and disciplinary decisions were not made at the garage level, so the election shouldn't be able to proceed at the garage level, that we would need to organize the entire company. And we were able to get people to document that their garage manager, who was on site at that single location, was changing their schedule. They had emails to prove this kind of thing. And it ended up being pretty important. Our bargaining unit stood. They weren't able to expand it out and make the election basically impossible to run. Since then, one of the big things is that one of the members of our organizing unit, of our organizing committee, has been collecting the contracts of other unionized private ambulance companies to see what they've been able to bargain for, so that which helps us know what demands we can probably be making, looking at similar markets around the country, and seeing what workers with the same level of certification working for pretty similar companies are also making, to give people an idea of what they can demand, what they can expect to win, and what other people have won by engaging in this kind of organizing. That's that's where it looks today. That's kind of what research has been able to look like for us, is like a pretty DIY campaign.
Wonderful. Well, Ramson, Lillian, Walker, thank you all so much, and good luck finding about all the weird stuff that your bosses are up to, because they're always up to some weird stuff. That's a guarantee.